You know that feeling, right? Where you've got your whole day planned out, maybe even color-coded,
Yeah.
but you still end the day feeling like you were just chasing your own tail.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like you're super busy putting in all the hours, but somehow not really moving forward on the stuff that, actually matters.
Exactly. It's so frustrating.
It really is. And, well, that's kind of the perfect entry point for David Kadavy's whole idea. Mind management, not time management.
Right. It's a fascinating shift.
It really is. It basically suggests the problem isn't really the clock, the 24 hours we get. It's more about how we handle our mental energy within those hours.
Yeah, and for you listening, especially if you're keen on absorbing knowledge quickly, effectively, without that feeling of being overwhelmed, this could be a real game changer.
Definitely.
So think of this deep dive as like your shortcut to understanding this different approach to productivity. We're drawing heavily on Kadavy's insights, particularly from his YouTube video transcript.
Our mission today, basically, is to unpack these core ideas of mind management.
And show how it might actually be more effective, maybe even more creative than just trying to, optimize every single minute.
Exactly. Because just managing the clock often doesn't cut it.
Okay, so let's dive in. The whole traditional time management thing, it often feels like you're fighting a losing battle, doesn't it?
It really can. You make these super detailed schedules.
Yeah, the perfect plan.
Right. But then you sit down and you're either just batting away distractions left and right, or you just don't have the mental oomph for the big important tasks.
Corey, the energy just isn't there, even if the time slot is blocked off.
That's such a key point Kadavy makes. He talks about this aha moment he had while writing his first book.
Oh, yeah.
He realized his progress wasn't really linked to how many hours he sat there. It was about whether he was actually in the right state of mind to write effectively.
That rings so true. We've all been there, haven't we? Staring at a blank page or a problem.
Yeah, feeling like you're wading through thick mud.
And then suddenly, maybe hours later or even the next day, boom, clarity strikes and things just start flowing.
Precisely. Kadavy mentions weeks of just struggling with design work, then suddenly breaking through. It really shows how inefficient it is to just rigidly follow a to-do list if your brain isn't, cooperating.
The time might be technically available.
But the mental engine isn't running on the right fuel for that specific task. He uses this analogy like you wouldn't expect an elite athlete to just jump into peak performance without warming up, right?
Good point. No way.
Well, a to-do list is like the workout plan. It tells you what exercises to do, but it doesn't actually warm up your mental muscles.
Okay, so if time management is about the clock and the list, what's the core idea of mind management then?
At its heart, it's about consciously managing and directing your creative energy. Like recognizing different tasks need different kinds of thinking, different mental states, and then strategically matching your work to your current mood or energy level.
So it's not about forcing yourself to do, say, deep analytical work when you're feeling more brainstormy or creative.
Exactly. You'd lean into that creative vibe instead.
Yeah.
Find a task that fits it.
How do you actually do that?
Kadavy suggests a really simple exercise. Just ask yourself, what kind of work do I feel like doing right now? What am I in the mood for?
Okay.
And then look at your tasks and ask, okay, what do I need to do that actually fits that mood?
Ah, I see. So you're aligning the task with your current mental state.
Precisely. And he argues that this alignment can just dissolve procrastination barriers because you're working with yourself, not fighting against yourself.
That makes intuitive sense. It's like swimming with the current instead of against it.
Exactly.
But okay, what about those times when something just has to get done? Like a deadline is looming and you're just not feeling the right vibe for it.
Yeah, that's a fair question. In those cases, mind management isn't about just giving up. It's about consciously trying to shift your mental state.
Oh.
You'd first identify what kind of mood or mental state would be good for that task.
Okay. Focus, maybe, or analysis.
Right. Then you think back.
Mm-hmm.
When did I last feel that way? What were the conditions? What was I doing beforehand?
Trying to recreate the trigger.
Sort of, yeah. Trying to replicate those conditions to nudge your brain into the right gear. It might take practice, obviously. It's not instant.
But it's a strategy rather than just brute force.
Exactly. It's about being intentional with your mental environment.
Kadavy mentions observing these patterns in himself, right? Noticing when certain moods seem to line up with certain types of work.
Yes, he started seeing these connections, like maybe mornings were better for creative drafting, afternoons for editing or admin tasks.
And he didn't just observe, he started actively trying to influence it.
That's what's really interesting. He began developing routines, rituals, things he could do to deliberately shift his mood and get into the right state for the work he needed to do.
Like what kind of rituals?
Well, we'll get into some specifics like his first hour rule later.
Yeah.
But it could be anything from listening to certain music, changing location, having a specific drink, small things to signal to his brain what kind of work was coming.
And he also realized tasks aren't monolithic.
Right. A big project like write a report actually breaks down into smaller bits. Research, outlining, drafting, editing, formatting.
And each might benefit from a different mental state.
Potentially, yeah. Research might need curiosity. Drafting needs creative flow. Editing needs critical focus.
And this wasn't just his gut feeling. He found science to back it up.
Yes. He started looking into creativity research, neuroscience, psychology, and found that a lot of his intuitive discoveries actually aligned with scientific findings about how the brain works, especially regarding creativity.
Which brings us to his move to South America, Medellin, Colombia. That wasn't just a random change of scenery, was it?
No, not at all. He describes it as a very deliberate experiment. He wanted to get away from the sort of hyper-scheduled, time-obsessed culture he felt was prevalent in the U.S.
To escape the time management world, as he put it.
Exactly, and really push the boundaries of living and working based on mind management principles.
And he found it worked.
He found his best, most impactful work was actually produced during his time there, which then made him really need to understand why, what was different.
So Medellin became his lab, in a way, his brain in a jar on Mars, I think he called it.
Yeah, something like that. Minimizing distractions, really focusing intensely on managing his internal state, his mental energy.
Which leads nicely into this concept of the creative sweet spot. What does he mean by that?
The creative sweet spot is basically identifying the specific time and conditions where you do your best, most important creative work.
Like your peak creative zone.
Exactly. It's kind of like Stephen Covey's Big Rocks idea from First Things First.
Putting the important things in first.
Right. But Kadavy applies it specifically to your prime creative time. That's the non-negotiable time you protect for your deepest, most demanding creative efforts, like writing.
Okay. And he uses a test, the remote associates test, these word puzzles, to kind of illustrate how creative thinking happens.
Yeah, it's a neat little example. It helps show the difference between divergent and convergent thinking.
Can you walk us through one, like the pine crab sauce example?
Sure. So you get those three words, pine crab sauce. The challenge is to find a single fourth word that relates to all three.
Okay. Pine crab sauce.
To solve it, your brain has to do what's called divergent thinking. Your brainstorm associations. Pine dot tree, needle, cone. Apple, crab dot shell, ocean, walk. Maybe crab apple. Sauce, red, pasta, dip. Maybe applesauce.
Apple, pineapple, crab apple, applesauce.
Exactly. And the key thing is how you get there. It's often not a step-by-step logical deduction. It's more like exploring possibilities until suddenly, bam, the connection clicks.
That aha moment, the eureka moment.
Precisely. And neuroscience backs this up. They've seen bursts of activity, often in the brain's right hemisphere, right at that moment of insight.
So creative insight often feels sudden. It just appears.
It often does. It's not usually the result of just grinding harder in a linear way.
But that insight, that new connection, apple,
Yeah.
it's novel, but not necessarily useful on its own in every context.
Good point. That's where convergent thinking comes in. Divergent thinking generates lots of possibilities, the insight. Convergent thinking then narrows those down, evaluates them, figures out if they're actually useful or practical.
So you need both. The wild ideas and the ability to refine them.
Absolutely. And a novel idea isn't always a good idea until you've tested and developed it.
Okay, so how do we encourage more of those novel connections, those insights? Kadavy uses this analogy of light bulbs and wires.
Yeah, it's a helpful way to think about it. Imagine concepts in your mind are like light bulbs. The connections between them are like wires. Obvious connections, like, say, peanut butter and jelly, have really thick, strong wires. The pathway is well-worn, easy to activate.
Right, automatic almost.
Exactly. But truly novel ideas often come from connecting concepts with weaker wires.
Yeah.
Less obvious links, like maybe peanut butter and chocolate. That was novel once.
Okay, so we need to access those weaker connections more easily.
Yes. Kadavy talks about lowering the threshold of awareness for these less common associations, making it easier for those faint signals to reach your conscious mind.
And how does that happen? He mentions the prefrontal cortex playing a role.
Right. The prefrontal cortex is kind of like the brain's executive function center.
Mm.
It helps with planning, decision-making, and also sort of editing our thoughts, keeping things logical and on track.
The internal editor.
Exactly. And when that editor is a bit less active, less dominant.
It allows for weirder connections to surface.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It facilitates more divergent thinking because there's less filtering going on. Your thoughts can wander down less conventional paths.
Okay. This feels like it's leading towards the idea of using grogginess, that slightly fuzzy state when you first wake up.
Bingo. That state, technically called sleep inertia, can actually be a creative advantage.
Really? How?
Because your prefrontal cortex, that editor, isn't fully booted up yet. It's still coming online.
So you're naturally less inhibited mentally, more open to those weaker connections.
That seems to be the idea. Your thinking can be more diffuse, more divergent.
Yeah.
Which is why Kadavy developed his first-hour rule.
Ah, okay. Explain that.
It's simple but powerful. Dedicate the very first hour of your day, before coffee, before checking email or news, to your most important creative work, like writing.
Leveraging that groggy, divergent thinking state.
Precisely. Capitalizing on that window before the editor fully wakes up and starts organizing everything too rigidly.
Oh, wait. If the prefrontal cortex is sleepy, doesn't that also mean you're more easily distracted?
Ah, yes. That's the trade-off. You might be more open to novel ideas, but also more susceptible to shiny objects.
You need to control your environment.
Absolute critical. That's why Kadavy mentioned setting up a very minimalist workspace for this morning session, like a small desk facing a blank white wall.
To minimize those visual distractions.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, harnessing the creative benefit of the grogginess while structuring your environment to maintain some focus, to eventually allow for the convergent thinking needed later.
So the first hour rule isn't just about the time, it's about the state and the place.
Yes. Consistent dedication of that initial hour to your most crucial task, leveraging the mental state, supported by a distraction-free environment.
Did he find it hard at first, fighting those urges to check things?
Oh, he mentions definitely struggling initially. The pull of email, social media, it's strong. But he found that actually doing the focused work created a kind of positive feedback loop. Each successful session made it a bit easier to resist those urges the next day.
That makes sense. You build the focus muscle.
You do. And it's important here to distinguish grogginess, that post-sleep state, which can be good for divergent thought if you got enough sleep, from actual sleepiness or fatigue.
Right. Being tired isn't generally great for creativity.
Generally not. Though, interestingly, some research suggests a mild sleep deprivation can sometimes boost divergent thinking, again, because the prefrontal cortex is less active. But,
Big but.
big but, chronic lack of sleep is terrible for memory consolidation, overall cognitive function, and sustained creative work. So it's not a strategy to rely on. Adequate sleep is key.
Okay, so you have this groggy divergent phase early on. What about later in the day?
Well, cognitive peak, like your sharpest focus for analytical tasks, often hits in the late morning for many people.
So maybe a natural flow from divergent ideas early on to convergent refinement later.
That seems to be a common pattern, yeah. Work with that cycle.
Another really interesting concept Kadavy brought back from Medellin was this idea of event time versus clock time.
Yes. This is a fascinating contrast. Clock time is what most of us run on in, say, North American or European cultures.
Yeah.
Fixed schedules, meetings at specific hours, deadlines tied to the clock.
9 a.m., do task A. 10 a.m., do task B.
Exactly. Event time, on the other hand, is more fluid. Things happen when the time feels right, or when a preceding event naturally concludes. The task dictates the schedule, not the clock.
And he felt Medellin operated more on event time.
He observed a generally slower pace of life there, less rigid adherence to schedules, which seemed to foster this event time orientation, and his deliberate move there was partly to immerse himself in that.
Why is event time potentially better for creative work?
Because insight, as we discussed, is often sudden. It doesn't arrive on a schedule.
Right, you can't pencil in, have breakthrough idea at 10:15 a.m.
Exactly. Creative work often requires deep immersion, getting lost in the process. Clock time, with its rigid breaks and deadlines, can constantly interrupt that flow state.
It pulls you out just as you might be getting somewhere.
Precisely. So with event time, you might use time units like, I'll work on this for a couple of hours, more as rough guides than strict stop-start boundaries.
Yeah.
You let the task itself signal when it's time to pause or switch.
This shift, focusing on mind management, embracing event time, it had a huge impact on his actual output, didn't it? He talks about quadrupling his creative output.
Yeah, it's a pretty dramatic claim, but he backs it up. He tracked his word count meticulously.
Okay.
And in the year, he really focused on implementing these mind management principles. 2016, I think. He clocked something like 880,000 words.
Wow. That's like multiple books worth.
It is, compared to around 200,000 the previous year when he was using a more traditional approach. So roughly a quadrupling.
Now, some might say, okay, quantity, but what about quality?
Fair point.
Yeah.
But there's research, like Dean Simonton's work, suggesting a strong link between quantity and quality in creative fields. Basically, the more you produce, the higher the chances of producing masterpieces.
More at-bats, more chances for a home run.
Kind of, yeah. And Kadavy also notes that alongside the increased word count, his online following grew significantly. He got published on major sites, suggesting the quality was also improving, or at least resonating more. He credits aligning his mood with his tasks for that improved flow and quality.
That's compelling evidence for the approach.
It definitely makes you think.
So this whole journey underscores that creativity isn't just this one single act. It's more of a process, often moving through stages.
Exactly. And understanding these stages can make the whole thing less mysterious and maybe less painful. The classic model breaks it down into 4 stages.
Okay, what are they?
First is preparation. This is where you're gathering information, researching, defining the problem, really immersing yourself in the material. Kadavy's whiteboard brainstorming, playing with sticky notes, that's preparation.
Turning the problem over and over, actively engaging.
Right. You need diverse input here. Then comes incubation. This is crucial, but often overlooked.
Stepping away.
Yes. After intense preparation, you need to let it simmer. Step back, do something else, rest, sleep. Kadavy mentions the need for bodily recuperation and peaceful comfort. Your subconscious mind keeps working on it in the background.
Like Stephen King putting a draft in a drawer for weeks.
Exactly. Or Lillian Hellman reviewing her work before sleep. That's allowing for incubation. You have to trust the process and not feel guilty about stepping away.
Then comes
illumination. That's the aha moment. The insight suddenly pops into your conscious awareness, often when you least expect it, maybe waking up, in the shower, on a walk.
You need to be ready to catch it then.
Definitely. Keep a notebook handy. And finally, there's verification.
Checking if the idea actually works.
Yes. This is where convergent thinking comes back in strongly. You take the insight, test it, refine it, shape it, figure out how to implement it, ruthlessly critique and polish it.
Preparation, incubation, illumination, verification. Knowing those stages exist might help you trust the process more, especially during that sometimes frustrating incubation phase.
Absolutely. It normalizes the feeling of being stuck after intense work, reframing it as a necessary part of the cycle.
So wrapping this all up, the fundamental takeaway here seems to be a pretty radical shift in perspective, doesn't it?
It really is. Moving away from just obsessing over the clock and managing time slots.
Towards skillfully managing your own mind, your mental energy, understanding your unique rhythms.
And aligning what you do with how your brain actually works best at any given moment.
And for you, the listener, grappling with how to learn and achieve more without burning out, understanding these principles feels like a really powerful shortcut.
Yeah, it potentially bypasses a lot of the less effective brute force methods of traditional time management.
We've definitely touched on some real aha moments ourselves today thinking about this. The surprising power of grogginess.
Right. Who knew being a bit fuzzy could be useful?
The sudden way insights often arrive.
And that simple but profound idea of just asking yourself, what am I in the mood for, before picking a task?
It really prompts some self-reflection, doesn't it? Maybe a good question for you to ponder is, how well do your current work habits actually sync up with your natural energy cycles?
Yeah, are you fighting your own biology? Could you experiment? Maybe try Kadavy's first hour rule? Or just start paying more attention to when you feel most creative, most focused, most analytical.
Could making small shifts in when and how you approach tasks make a real difference in your results and just your overall sense of, accomplishment and well-being?
It's a powerful thought.
It leaves you with this final question, really. What if the key to getting more done and maybe doing better work isn't about cramming more into your schedule,
but about cultivating the right mental environment for your best work to actually emerge and flourish?
Something to definitely think about.
And if you want to go much deeper on all of this, we absolutely recommend checking out the book itself, David Kadavy's Mind Management, Not Time Management.
It really lays out the whole philosophy and practical strategies in detail.
Definitely worth exploring if this conversation sparked your interest.